this was a really exciting period because now we had a trust. And so the first Uraia strategic plan had a theme which linked the idea of an informed citizenry and a healthy democracy. And so the three things that we began to emphasize was civic knowledge, which is the idea, therefore, that people had to be educated. They needed to know what were their rights and responsibilities as citizens. You also needed civic skills, because once people knew, they had to be able to engage. It wasn't enough just to know, you needed to do something about it. And then there was a third, civic dispositions, which I would like to come back to later on. Because civic dispositions was about what are people's attitudes, what really drives people to do what it is that they want to do. What is the DNA that drives you? But for Uraia Trust, the first strategic framework, you can imagine there was so much that needed to be done. And so the emphasis was really on the first two. The program was delivered through three pillars. So civic education that focused on the knowledge part, civic engagement that focused on the skills part, and then because it was a new institution, on an institutional transformation. And really the thinking at this point was that we needed to celebrate the fact that there was a new constitution. Uraia Trust is as old as the constitution, and that not only do we have individual citizens, we also have corporate citizens. But Uraia as a trust needed to start by being a model corporate citizen itself. Now, the four focus areas that really the program delivered on in terms of the material that was being engaged with was, of course, the Constitution. So people needed to know what the Constitution was about. And then secondly, there was a big focus on a free and independent judiciary. There was also the focus on free and fair elections, because as you know, people knew that as people went forward, there needed to be a sense that whoever would be elected into the many institutions were there because they deserved to be there. And finally, to expand who was participating. So we had talked about gender in NCEP, but now thinking about all the marginal and marginalized communities that had been left out of previous programs, not just civic education, but generally in government programs. So those were the four focus areas of the first strategic plan. So then we came to the second strategic plan, and this one ran from 2016 with the one that we're just completing now in 2021. The theme of this was from rights and responsibilities to values and nationhood. So as I said at the beginning, there was a lot of emphasis on rights and responsibilities, and we wanted now people to start to move to this issue of the civic responsibilities that I talked about. Not just doing things by the letter, but beginning to think about the spirit. The three things that began to mature, I would say, in terms of the pillars is that in the civic education program, we began to ask ourselves how we could deliver on a more responsive civic education program. In other words, as you went to different parts of the country, as you engaged with different constituencies, really making sure that the civic education that they were being offered spoke to the needs and the priorities of the people that were being engaged with. In terms of civic engagement, Uraia now began to really look at how you could bring in individual civic educators and budget facilitators to work on particular aspects very directly with the citizens, so that people are now getting much more hands-on, moving from knowledge to actually acting on what they knew. And then in terms of institutional transformation, now that the trust was up, it had been running, beginning to really think about how did we deepen this idea of transforming all the actors that we were working with, whether they were in this, government actors as well as the civil society organizations that we were working with. So really deepening their own responsibilities, their own responsiveness, helping them understand what their rights were, and making sure that all three of these pillars were deepening in their work. In terms of the focus areas, very much a continuation, entrenching constitutionalism, again, working with the judiciary and on issues to do with the judiciary, working on issues to do with elections, and also really focusing again on the communities that had not perhaps received civic education in the past, who had been historically marginalized, deepening our reach with that. And this is where we are at the moment, and this is what now gives us the basis of where the strategy is today. With regard to the focus areas, very much a continuation of the work in terms of the Constitution, now beginning to really entrench it, to move people from thinking about just getting to know the Constitution to entrenching constitutionalism. Again, continuing work with the judiciary, strengthening the judiciary and supporting the judiciary. And then in terms of elections, continuing to deepen our work to make sure that the elections were free and fair. And now with marginalized communities, as we continue to think about how to really bring in historically marginalized communities, the focus was on women, working with youth, and people with disabilities in particular. And so we could not be more excited to see all these things come together with this strategic framework, the third one, where we are going to be focusing on nurturing an engaged, empowered, and values-based citizenry. And you'll really see all the threads that we've been working with coming together. We are going to be working in 3 outcome areas. The first one is the idea of an ecosystem. Why an ecosystem? Well, we've been growing from strengthening Uraia as an organization, as a trust, to working with the partners that we work with directly. And now we want to deepen our engagement with everybody else who is delivering civic education in Kenya, whether they're working with the state or the non-state. Going back to that original idea that civic education as an institution in Kenya needs to be vibrant, it needs to be all over the country, and it needs to have as many people as possible and many actors as possible working on it. And because we know that as a trust, we will never be able to deliver on civic education for everybody, we are now putting in our energies to growing an ecosystem, to working with even civic actors that we do not work directly with, or government actors that we do not work directly with. The second outcome is picking up on the work that we've already been doing in terms of the content of the materials that we've been working with. And now we really want to focus on the question of impact. We know that people are being educated, they understand the material, they're familiar with it, they're aware of what their rights and responsibilities are. We know that people are being given the skills to be able to work with the budgets or to be able to work with different state agencies or state governments in terms of holding each other accountable as citizens and government. But now we want to see the impact. Is this engagement actually making change? And so this is where we're going to be putting the emphasis in. And then we want to go back to that idea of civic responsibilities, the DNA of who we are as citizens. And everybody keeps talking about values. Everybody keeps saying that, oh, you know, our big problem is values. We want to understand, what do we mean when we say we have a problem with values? What do we mean when we say we have values but we are not living them out? And so the big outcome that we want to look at is Utu. We have chosen the word Utu because Utu goes to the very essence of who we are as human beings. And we want to ask, what does Utu look like in the public sphere? And this outcome will go not so much in terms of message delivery. We're not going to be telling people what to think. We want to go back to the idea of having conversations with Kenyans, helping us together in the same way that we came to understand what it meant when we said Kenyans have rights, and then what it meant when we said Kenyans have rights and responsibilities. We want to know what it means when it says Kenyans have Utu.